Since I've never looked at a tape, are all the beginnings just me standing here looking? Should it be something else? The middle of a sentence? Once or twice I was going to squat down and just raise my head up. But then I recalled what serious business this be. I'm going to try and refine your attention to the same general area of humanity acting literally as molecules on one level in life's body in a certain area. This area being that ever popular subject in question of, in the great heavyweight fight, who would win, heredity or environment? And of course I keep hinting to you that environment would not show up. If environment showed up, it would prove to be a protoplasm. It would prove to be an illusion. So, try chewing on this, sports fans. That if all of life's mortal molecules did see heredity as being in that pretentious and assumed battle, if all of life's mortal molecules did see heredity as being all, then no one would attempt to change the festering sores or the passing ills in life's body. No one would become white blood cells in life's higher circuits. It's not exactly the case, but assume that life had on its own level blue and yellow circuits. Then in a sense, one of the purposes of humanity being incomplete, humanity operating on a digital, a binary level in such areas as being almost convinced in part of life's body that environment is something that is having a direct impact on people's lives and it can be changed. Part of what this does is it sends certain humans to areas where in some cases there have been festering sores. To give you a possible hint, how about wars? Somewhere in life's body, it has been sending messages, talking to itself, coming out in mortal molecules, you and your forefathers, decrying the constant state of warfare, hostility. So, in some way, this is a festering sore. And life continues, in part, to send molecules to do battle with one another. That is, nations, communities, political groups, religious groups. But then it has another part that if I had to describe them, which I guess I'm going to have to, I would say that they were fairly ill-equipped adolescent white blood cells. They keep rushing to talk about it. Oh, sometimes they get together and they march and they wave banners. But remember what good banners do. That was like one of the jokes in World War II of somebody supposedly trying to give a piece of good advice to Joseph Stalin about some of his planned invasions and reactions in World War II, that the Pope wasn't going to care for that in particular. And Stalin supposedly showed some interest, but had one question. That was, how many companies does the Pope have? That's Army talk. So life has some molecules out walking in the streets, waving banners, but they're almost as though they were at the red level, not yet fully formed white blood cells. All right, you could take that as being a long, festering sore in life's body. But then it has a non-ending string of passing ills, the same way as you do. Every day you have something that seems to hurt, your head for a second, a hamstring, a pork string. But life has a multitude of passing ills, except that's not the way it's looked at. The passing ills sometimes are cured by an influx of white blood cells, and sometimes it would seem to be only through yellow circuit intervention. That is, talking about it. In the areas that I am designating as being passing ills as opposed to long festering sores that I point out, that marching in the streets and talking about the ill-advisement of war, and that the talk does not go up against Stalin's troops, no matter what the Pope says. On the contrary, when it gets into areas that would appear to be, if you can see it, to be passing ills, whether they last a day, a month, a year, in some locale of life's body, oftentimes, apparently, talking about it seems to cure it. Which, to jump off on a real side street, since many of you continue to pick up things on your own regarding what I pointed out to you, that part of the way to facilitate change in yourself is don't ever talk about it. That if indeed you have quit eating pepper on your food, is don't ever say that you quit eating pepper. Don't ever admit it. If somebody asks you, don't respond, change the subject. But mainly is don't let yourself. Don't ever be sitting there and somebody that knows that you always put pepper on your salads hands you the pepper and your internal voice. Even perhaps while you have decided, I'm not going to tell anyone, and the voice says that I have quit using pepper. You can't even do that. Not if you're going to operate most efficiently. So this side road that I was going to take for a second is, how is it then that apparently at times life has cured a passing ill? It goes into the great never, never land only through what seems to be mortal conversation about it. Is life talking to itself? Is life telling itself what it's doing? Are you that high up in life's nervous stem? By you, I mean all of humanity. Are the conversations of humanity part of life's talking to itself? Heavy questions. Weighty questions indeed, and something to ponder. Back to the subject. Let me take a glaring example. I keep bringing these up. But by now, those of you who are really operating at least at the speed of cotton should realize how this affects you, your own partnership, and how it listens to what's going on in life. A fairly recent example I just happened to hear out in the ordinary streets of life. A woman with some credentials in psychology or some field has written a book. The book being supposedly an inquiry, she said, into why is it that women who seem to be exceptionally smart at an early age, high school, some of college, seem to lose their intellectual, whatever the intellectual stimulus was that drove them to be outstanding intellectually in high school and, as she put it, in parts of college. And I listened to her talk for a few minutes on this interview, and her speculation was, if not her decisions, but the way she was presenting it, was the several possible dynamics, such as she learns that in our society, in this day and time, that men do not approve of a smart woman. She found that there was no peer support, that intellectually outstanding women were in a very small minority, and therefore she had no support from a widespread sisterhood, and was like she lost interest. All right. Now, if I said, operating on this digital, the binary level, if I said, all right, taking the choices, she's saying it is psychological influences from the environment, such as the hostility of many men toward a woman who's smart. The possible reasons, their fear of being overwhelmed. That's the obvious one that they bring up nowadays. Given this binary background, if I were so bold as to simply point out that, all right, given those two choices, that is on the zero side of the binary background, that you'd do better off to look at this. It's changing as we've been alive, because it's only been this generation that someone would have written such a book, that life would have had such an interest to have someone write a book, for them to be interviewed, for me to use it for an example. But what if I said it's still a matter of this, a hormonal change, molecules moving around sexually, and it's still the general situation to whatever intellectual, apparently intellectual barnstorming that women might do in high school, it's suddenly as though they get overcome by hormones, and without them analyzing any more than anybody else analyzes anything, men or women, the interest that they seem to have had, or at least the ability they seem to have had to cope with algebra and physics and whatnot, seems now to be leveled at sexual relations. Men. All right, if we present that to the woman who wrote that book, and many women and men right now in this part of the world, in this day and time, they would say that, to say the very least, is archaic. To be charitable, that is archaic. It simply does not fit the times. That is not what's going on. We would not, speaking in the royal sense of we would not, would we, have the nerve to try and say anything to such people about how everything, even if there is a psychological impact from the environment, it must come about through the senses of the person being influenced, and it affects all those little molecules. The hormones being run about by the bloodstream, the heat exchange, the foodstuffs being carried around, sound waves, sight waves. So that if they were correct, in this instance, there was external, that is environmental influences causing this, I still got them. We still have them. But we would not bring that up, because no one would hear that. I could have pulled out a less potentially vitriolic example than this, but being the devil-may-care guru that I am, but what I want you to consider is this. If people did not believe, to use this example, and any example you can see in life, if people did not now believe, a growing number of people, that certain groups, such in this case women, are being held back, have been discriminated against, have done less than they could have done because of other people, then this particular place, which has been some kind of wound in life's body, would never have been attended to by men. That what women had been doing up until now, they would be doing forever. There would have been no women's lib, as it was called. There would be no, now, a prime example for those of you who don't realize it, of women being interested in this, and we having at least half women attracted to this. Whereas, as I pointed out, two generations ago, there would have been no women here. None. So life has expanded itself. But if everyone, now remember I'm playing with reality, this could not have been, it's an acme. It just sounds like that it's possible, but it's not. But if it could have been possible, 20 years ago, for everyone who was wired up to have any interest in the question of women's place in American society, if everyone had been wired up who had any interest in it, to listen to several questions being proposed as to what should be women's place, should there be any change, should we expand the possibilities, and if everyone who heard it and was wired up to be interested in it went, well, this is ridiculous. Everything is determined by genes. The way things are is the way they're supposed to be. And someone is a mutant to bring up the question. That would have been the end of the subject, right? That would have been the opening and closing of women's lib. It would have been life, like such as life saying, I wonder if I need a haircut, and looks in the mirror and says, no, I don't, and walks off and forgets it. Yeah. That'd have been it. There is much more to this so-called question between environment versus heredity. That's why I keep laying on it. And I guess shortly, as I've always done, I'm going to apparently abandon this and slip it back on to you inside of a carp or a duck uniform so that you don't realize it. But a part of what keeps people wired up and doing what they are, a part of what takes your energy, as many of you see it, that you can't seem to keep going like you can on Thursday night or the nights you hear the tapes. A part of it is the continuing belief. Nay, scratch belief. I need to think up a new word for you. I just keep saying belief and feel. It is you at line level consciousness. It is you that continues to believe not only that there is an out there, but it is something that must be dealt with. It is something that by and large is overwhelming. That out there is what made you what you are. And given those two possibilities, I'm going to tell you again, that is not true. As long as you're held captive by that, nothing will ever change. As long as you believe that in any way what your parents did to you, what some kid did to you when you were in the 7th grade that you still remember, what your uncle did to you, what your aunt did to you, what happened to you when you were drafted into the service, what happened after your parents were killed, as long, whether it comes about through apparently spoken voices internally, or you just begin to notice that this is me, which is true with everyone, as long as you're operating on the basis that what I am, I can attribute to any degree to out there, you're done for. You will, however, I say you're done for, that's one of my cheap comments again. As long as you go along that course, you will have a very quick, it's somewhere around 186, about 187,000 miles per second, that you will have a going away banquet and life will hand you a watch for your good service, except it's going to go so fast that by the time you look at the watch, time is done for. You are grub food. Life saw you, rewarded you, remembered who you were, or at least it played like it. Oh, it's you, you're retiring, here's your watch. And by the time you reach for it, it's all over. But everyone, with these few exceptions, must operate on that basis. If there is no, remember, belief is a poor word. It is you. As long as there's the feeling that not only in the past and that horizontal line of what my parents has done, but right now, Did I go out and I walk in a store, I'm in a fairly non-charged mood, and ask somebody, do you have such and such? And they say, would you wait a minute, would you wait a minute, would you wait a minute? And you're upset. And let us say that you are so insightful, being Mr. or Mrs. Brain Flash, you turn around and you suddenly realize, I'm getting hostile. That's what comes from being able to observe yourself. That I'm rather hostile, and there's no doubt about it. The woman did it. And you may also be, by now, such an enlightened creature that some voice in you may say, well, she probably had a hard day on her feet all day, such as that excuses it, or that explains it, that neutralizes it. You're an idiot. Because you're still accepting what happened out there is having an impact on you. Just by saying, well, we all got our burdens. Her feet may hurt, and she didn't mean it toward me personally. You say that. Everybody says that. Well, everybody that tries to be somebody. Jesus Jr., Abraham II, Buddha's half-brother. They all tried that kind of stuff. Of realizing I have a certain kind of hostility toward women, toward men. But if I told you the way my parents treated me, the way my father treated me, the way my mother treated me, the childhood I had, now wait, I'm not blaming my parents. I've listened to Buddha talk, I have seen the light. Now I understand they had their own problems. And they did not really mean to skew my brain and my personality like it is. They didn't mean it. But still you're saying, that is what caused me to be like that. But you must understand, to get your watch, to get life to shake your hand at that split second and to retire you and forget you, you have got to operate on that basis. You have got to be wired up, you have got to be born, you have got to live out your mortal molecular life on that basis, or you wouldn't attempt to change. Back on another quick side street, do I even have to point this out again? Of course, if you didn't attempt to change in some way, you wouldn't be here. Where does this all lead? Life has a continuing set of ills, as I was calling them, but I can also point out to you that it is this ever-present state of adolescence, that life is continually growing. Human consciousness can see no beginning to it. It cannot see pre-puberty. Human consciousness, more or less, cannot see the end of it. It cannot see life's death. It cannot even see life's full maturity. Because if life is any better off than we are, which goes unsaid, then you've got to understand, you've got to face the fact that right now you don't know where this is headed. You don't know what you might be in the next 20 years. And I don't mean externally. You don't know what might be the condition internally. Those of you that have undergone some of these real shifts, I've never asked anybody, but I can assure you that nobody predicted what it was. You just suddenly realized one day you tried to do something, sort of, and you couldn't do it anymore. Or you suddenly had a realization that back down the line I used to feel such and such, and now I'm trying to remember how a mosquito bite felt 10 years ago. I remember I used to scratch it, but I can't even bring it back. It's just gone. That your entire system has shifted, and no theory. In the same way that you had never predicted. You can't. In that same way, you cannot predict. Human consciousness cannot predict what will happen to life. Other than the fact that it's not dying. I've given you my word on that. But you cannot predict what life is going to do unless life is going to grow up. And it did have an exact parallel that could be verbalized with humanity that's going to grow up a few years, a few thousand years from now, and suddenly be 20 and get married and join up with its own decamp But the continual growing pains is in part what I mean by festering sores and ills and humanity being partly in charge of healing its wounds. This does not mean it just has to be something that happens like a catastrophe on this planet or major wars and that engage the majority of the population of humanity in acts of hostility. It does not have to be that. It is the continual aches and pains of adolescence. That the mortal molecules that be man, in the sense of the bloodstream, I started out mentioning some of this, is in charge of everything that your own blood molecules would be in charge of. The delivering of food, the taking away of waste, the heat exchange of dragging the heat out of the internal organs and the depths of the body and bring it out to the surface where you can sweat it off like God and James Brown intended. To bring up the antibodies, the antitoxins, the white blood cells to fight off immediate ills of your body. In that same way, it can be described very specifically. It can be seen very specifically that there are people on this planet, there are people in you that continue to serve those kinds of conversion positions, those kinds of conversions and movements of energy in life's body. Paragraph 2. I still wish we had a Bible, don't you? So that I could hold it and look and read from it, read a quotation, of course it'd be my quotation, but read it and think, did I actually say that? Attribute it to somebody else, and I read it and say that I'm going to base my thoughts tonight upon this brilliant, this inspired comment. And then we look at it and think, did I actually say that? Did the people transcribing this get a word wrong? But would that stop me? I'd take it like it is and use it. You people on tape, remember this is all humorous, these parts. Don't take it serious and don't get upset. Let me speak to you about what seems to be conversion, which I would like to clarify and point out is mechanical conversion out in life. Now I mean specifically in the areas of people apparently being converted to some religious system, some mystical system, some attempt to do this under some guise. Mechanical conversion versus this at the tempo, at the level, and the intensity at which I am attempting to lay it out before you. Mechanical conversion versus this. That's from chapter 2, verse 7. How about chew on this, that mechanical conversion, let me speak first of it. The best always comes first if you're mechanical and ordinary. Ordinary conversion harbors no problems, no contradictions, no half-eaten questions. As always, taking a wide spectrum of what would appear to be conversion of you looking out at life, I'm going to a fair extreme so that we'll cover the spectrum. You see someone who is converted, a dyed-in-the-wool convertee, wild-eyed, hair aflame, ready to speak about it, ready to try and encourage others, a real convertee. They have no questions, they got no problems, not with what they've been converted to. And there are no contradictions. Now this. This hides an unexpected release from such a condition. Paragraph 3. We have so many people here and people in other cities, and this will be true if somebody is seeing and listening to these tapes in the future. It'll still be true that there are many people, men and women, involved with this who are also involved with one another, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean. People that are doing you-know-what to each other. I want to mention several things about people who are, I should really say, molecular partners. That is, you are really sexually drawn together. And it comes and it goes, and some of you people are attracted, and then you break up. I'm aware of all that. But at any time that you are actually involved with somebody that's involved with this to any degree, this should come out of a kind of Bible, a kind of absolute certainty that I am telling you and that you should be able to feel every time I enunciate it in any way, that you should absolutely encourage each other unconditionally to expand, to grow, to develop. And you should do it with the same kind of energetic intensity that your own voices tell you that you should be doing. And then some. Now, who can say that they have ever done that? It's not an attempt to pick on anyone or make you feel guilty about anything. But if you heard what I said, men, any woman that you've ever been with in this group or otherwise, can any of you say that you ever experienced an unconditional, enthusiastic feeling which you expressed to the woman of unconditional encouragement for their own expansion with the same kind of vigor, with the same kind of intensity? Notice what I'm saying, though, not that you necessarily do, but that your voices tell you that you should be doing. And of course you don't do it. But the same intensity, the same kind of energetic vigor that your voices hound you, that you should be growing, you should be developing, and you don't do it. Not enough to satisfy your voices. If you did, you'd be sitting up here on the stage and we'd have a row of deacons. We'd have an amen corner. You do not satisfy those voices. So take the voices, take the energy behind the voices that talk to you about yourself, and to that same degree, give it to the other person, and then some. It is more true, if I have to point out the obvious, going from the male to the distaff side. You are making a grave mistake to overlook this. You're making a grave omission in a way in which you could learn something. Another thing about relationships, that this continues to pop up with people here in the group because no one is yet immune completely from the same kinds of influences that happen in ordinary life. That we are all, to some degree, still having to play in traffic. And most of you are still breathing carbon dioxide at times. You can't get away from it. This situation is very common in life, and it continues to pop up in here. Some of it I see, some of it you people try and give me a hint, or you write me a note. But it has to do with almost being a blues tenant farmer. The two people get in a relationship, and then it's like one of you find yourself being almost a near slave to a blues farm. It seems to be this other person has got this blues farm. And that you, of course, this is getting to what would horizontally be referred to as the tail end of the relationship. Or psychologists would say the relationship be in trouble already. But it's a feeling like we're about to fall apart. I'd like to be out of this, the man or the woman, it doesn't matter. But then it's like the other partner can't seem to let go. And the more you feel like you're drifting away, or the more that you even believe that you're overtly trying to step out of it, it's suddenly as though, and of course I made up this term to cover a multitude of all of your sins and experiences, it's suddenly like you realize for the first time this other person has a blues farm and you've been a tenant farmer and you didn't realize it. You've been sharecropping. You didn't own the property, and now you can't seem to leave. In some way, you didn't realize it, but you have been drawn into bondage almost, like running up debts at the company store, and you can't seem to leave. And the more you try to leave, the more you think you should leave, the more you feel like, I'm leaving. It's as though the other person begins to crank up the blues farm even more. Whatever they're wired up to do, of suffering, whining, crying, telling you, hey, I know you're about to leave, you're going to go to another farm, you're going to do something, and I can't stand it. And then you feel like, well, I can't stand it if you can't stand it, I can't seem to leave. I wish all of you could listen to the few laughs that that got. I didn't do it for laughs, but that kind of laughter has a very peculiar, if not grotesque, ring to it, because it ain't funny. The only people what laughed just then are those people what been in that situation, those people who've been down the blues farm. Those kinds of situations. Down a third side street for the night. Notice this, I got to talk verbally in a digital manner from one position to the other. I got to chop up reality and even apparently be taking one position, one view, and then jump back to another one, as though one view was this way and one view is this way, when it's not true. But notice the limitations of the yellow circuit and the noises it makes. The person trying to get away, once you realize this, you got to walk off from it. You just got to leave. The person that feels like I'm being left, and you find that I'm wired up in such a way that I'll do almost anything right now to keep the person from going. Let me refer you back to several weeks ago when I told you very correctly that to do this, you've got to be able to look upon whatever's going on in ordinary life. Forget the extraordinary nature of this. Forget the extraordinary nature that you suspect that you haven't even experienced yet of this. Forget that. You look upon somebody riding a roller coaster and you think, I'll die if I do it. I told you you've got to realize this. You may not like it. You may not ever want to ride it again. It's not a trick. It's not a psychological game. You may be wired up to have a real red circuit fear of high places, going downhill. The little small things getting real big real quick. It may always be that way. So what? You've got to be able to look upon, and hear me when I say it, you've got to be able to feel something that if any other human, now I'm talking about people like my Uncle Elmer, he doesn't even know anything like this exists. He doesn't even suspect anything like this exists. He barely suspects that he exists. But if he can go get on that thing and go ride it, I can. Whether I like it or not, I can do it. if hundreds of thousands of people get on an airplane and go out there and that big old flying aluminum coffin takes off and goes up in the air and it takes them there and lands and people get on that plane. I mean, when I think about it, I just sure as soon as I feel it take off, I'm going to begin to scream and I'll jump up and I just know the whole plane will be full of people screaming and hollering, let me out, and beating on the windows. And you ask around and they say that never happens. Then you got to face this. All right, I need to go somewhere, and the way I can get there is on an airplane. I'm going to go, and I'm going to get in, I'm going to sit down. And if nobody else jumps up, as soon as that thing starts running down the, the runway, if nobody else begins to scream and throw up and to gasp, if nobody else does it, I won't do it. I can do that much. I may not like it. I may never get on a plane again. But if those other ordinary people, remember now, I'm talking to you people, and you consider that you're extraordinary. You consider that you got the possibility to be extraordinary. If somebody else, Mr. and Ms. John Q. Dumbass Public, can get on this plane and do that, I can do it. That's the end of the subject. Not that I like it. I may want to scream. The way I'm wired up, the way I just imagine getting in something and it take off the ground, I'll die. That part of me wired up that even thinks about it believes it'll die. Okay. So what else is new? You've known that ever since you heard about airplanes. You look at pictures taken out of airplanes. You look at movies, and you almost throw it in the theater. So what else is new? You've known that 20 or 30 years. If other people can do it and not die, I can do it and not die. All right. Back to what appears to be the subject. The feeling from the other apparent digital view that if this person leaves me, and words now are totally inadequate, not just in the sense of this thing, they're inadequate on a horizontal, poetic, spiritual, romantic level. Am I right? Yes, you are. That suddenly your partner is walking out of your life, or they just tell you, they sit down and say, listen, some way this is stunning my growth. Some way I feel like I'm dying in this relationship. It's nothing personal to you, but I'm already packing my clothes and I'm going to go over and stay with my sister for a while. And you feel like I'm going to die. It's like somebody has reached down and cut a plug out of my stomach like a watermelon and I'll die. I'll bleed to death. Romantically, emotionally. You can't do this. You just can't even imagine living without this person. You've only been with them 6 months, and half the time you bitch, but suddenly it's like, no, you can't leave the farm. I'm not trying to be funny. That is a quite real feeling of people just being frightened, people being sick, physically sick. There's one thing. You look around, and everybody that you know, everybody you've ever heard of on this planet, somebody's left them once, and they almost died. They'll tell you they did. But notice, if they can tell you they did, unless you're talking with spooks, they didn't. You have to look at it like the airplane, like the roller coaster. Right now, just real enough, I feel physically sick. You saying you're going to leave, and it strikes me, this is not open to debate. You mean it. I mean, it's so cold and calculated. You're not even mad at me. You're ready to shake hands. But you're about to leave right now, and I'll die. I can't live. It's like I'm trying to imagine tomorrow, and it's just blank. I'll die. As long as this happens to other people and they don't die, you can't die. You can't even entertain it. You got to look at it in the same way as I seem to be wired up to be afraid of heights. But other people can climb up on ladders. I either need to, and I'm going to, or else I'm going to do it once just to show that I'm at least, as great as I am, I'm going to show that I'm at least up to the level of being common. That I can at least ride a roller coaster or climb up on a ladder. I mean, before I begin to commune and have dinner with the gods, I believe I'll climb up a ladder. I mean, just in case the gods say, we've had our eye on you, and you certainly are brilliant, you certainly have unrecognized talent. And one of the guys said, wait a minute, aren't you that dude that wouldn't get up on a ladder? Think how embarrassed you will be right there in front of all the gods. I'm going to try and get some of these. I'm not going to try, I'm about to. Some of the questions. Editing, twisting, as I go. I keep saying that, but sometimes I read them just like they are. Is it easier for women to, quote, please men than it is for men to, quote, please women? All right. A very short excursion into the world of Mickey Spillane, or Raymond Chandler, Sherlock Holmes. A little short detective work, just Pogita, just a few seconds, should show you this. At least it should hint to you that the genes of women, in a very particular way, are more readily adaptable than those of the hairy sex. Life, in different ways, has known this. Of course it's known it, but it's known it on the mortal level. That humans have been rhapsodizing, poeticizing, humorizing, and of course bitching about this throughout the ages under different guises. In this century there was a book, the title of which is now almost a common expression. An anthropologist, I believe, wrote it, called The Natural Superiority of Women. There has even been attempts on the so-called psychological level of some parts of life's body to point out ways in which women are superior as a psychological reason why there is a certain kind of hostility extant men toward women throughout history. It seems like men are just prone to turn around and hit a woman, at least badmouth them, make crude jokes, the brother-in-law syndrome. It shouldn't take you much to see, and I'm not here as a psychological or sociological writer on some kind of mystical National Enquirer newspaper, because it is no secret. Appearances, as always, are not deceiving. Appearances are some great things, because appearances are what is appearing. And what you got to do is look. There is a readily seen adaptability to women's genes. And a very specific, not, let me caution before I go any further, to remind you one more time, not in a digital manner, that it's either this or that. That's the way it appears, though. That compared to men, genetically, they are more adaptable. That does not mean that it's better or worse, because I must point out to you this. A certain kind of rigidity, a certain kind of resistance is built in to man genetically compared to women, but it serves very lofty purposes, if you can see it right quick. It does, it's sort of like a general defining of the campsite of the D forces, and it helps support such necessary matters in life's body as war, general hostility, overall aggression. But notice, if it was true that was the men being genetically this way, at least in the area I'm talking about, and women being this other way, remember, that ain't it. We're leaving out the third one, which makes all of this diluted. It makes all of it incorrect, to tell you the truth, but speaking on that level, if it was all one way or the other, you understand that life would not be growing. Life would not even be existing in any recognizable form. But all of you should be able to see readily that there is a certain way, speaking on this binary basis, that compared to men, we're speaking relatively now, and we're leaving out the third aspect, the third leg of the situation. So remember, that renders all of this specious, I guess, as opposed to spurious. But then again, maybe not. That if it were all one way or the other, just think. The short detective course that I mentioned, you should be able to see just around you. Think back to a grandmother you're around, your mother perhaps, women you've been around. All of you have lived through a period of fairly rapid social changes in this country, racially, sexually, politically. Think back, you men, to women you've known. And don't try and dig up some exception you've heard about, some mutant on the TV. But think about people you've actually known, and by now you should be able to feel within your own nervous system how things are in general in this part of life's body, that is, our part of the world, during your lifetime. You men, think back. How many women have you ever known that was as prejudiced, that was as closed-minded, was as reactionary as men are in general? Now, part of their adaptability, it could have been that you could be sitting somewhere back in the 60s or whenever, and suddenly a group of men and women watching TV and something come on about some political situation, some hostility of one group toward another, racially, religiously, and some man sitting there may have spread out some kind of epithet towards one group, maybe made some racial, some religious slur about one group, and he may have turned to his woman and go, huh, am I right? And she may have gone, yeah. But by now all of you should be able to feel this, that even if you ever saw that, which you probably did, that something was fishy. Women, as a rule, did not bring that up. Many women would not even play along with it. Just think back, do you remember women of their own volition suddenly attacking some other group for some mechanical reason? They simply seem to be more open to change. They seem to be able to adapt to situations. Somewhat facetiously, I know some of you believe it is, I keep pointing out the real proof of their adaptability is they can put up with men. That women are not strapped in just on the ordinary horizontal level into the same kind of Iron Maiden roles wherein they seem to have a feeling that, all right, there's one kind of man, what I want is I want a dentist, and he needs to be kind of fair-featured, and he needs to be over 6 feet tall. A woman might say that to one of her friends, but you know, when it comes 2 o'clock and the bar is about to close, speaking literally and figuratively in life, she may end up with a tire changer that's short and dark and squatty. But men, who seems to have the most trouble getting partners? There is a, remember, relatively speaking, men compared to women, there is a kind of rigidity to men that resist change. While at the same time, they are the ones up until now to try and throw you in at least the third level right quick. It's faster than the eye can see. They're the ones that apparently in the yellow circuit have been the progenitors of change, technologically speaking. But when it comes to change of environment, a change in the social fabric of where they're living, a change in what it seems to be out there, being thrown against people that seem to be of a different wiring structure. Men are the ones that seem to be determined, by and large, to be like a 2x4, stuck into mud when the storm comes. The hurricane comes, and they're the ones that get broke, apparently. Whereas the storm comes, and it seems like, and they've been attacked for this, but it seems like women, when it gets down to it, and they realize the old man's, he's going to stand there in that storm, and it's going to break him. It's going to blow away our house trailer. It's going to break him. I got me and the kids to worry about. It's like a woman can play Mary Poppins and pull up her dresses and crinolines or an umbrella, and she can flow along with it. She may have to leave him, but compared to one another, they can adapt genetically more than men can. But one final note, let me point out again, it's not better or worse. Because were it not for the apparent opposite, more or less, were it not for men being bullheaded, obstinate, prejudiced, closed-minded, resistant to change compared to women, less adaptable socially, were it not for that, we wouldn't have the great things that have made us and brought us where we are. Murders, wars, stabbings, knifings, beating up on women and children, all those great things. Think about it. What is the basis, or why does it seem to be a certain kind of joy when one is surprised to discover an athlete with brains? Or to discover that an especially beautiful woman in person is actually nice also? Now, I assume everyone got the gist of that question. Well, even at a very crude, even at a crude level and in infrequent times, life seems to delight itself through man's discovery of mutants. Maybe I better be sure that everyone understood the question the person asked. That it seems that it's one person pointing out an observation on their part, that they seem to find a kind of joy. Let us say they find some sports figure and they interview the guy, it's usually a guy, and not only is he great physically at what he does, but it turns out he seems to be intelligent. Or it turns out he writes poetry, you know, it's above the level of Dr. Seuss. And it seems to be, hey, all those sorts of things. Or to find out that some scientist, somebody that's just won a Nobel Prize in biochemistry, maybe to find out that the guy is a discus thrower, world class. You don't realize it until they show him out there with his shirt off, and the bastard is good. He's not doing it to show off, he does it. That is, compared to routine life, they are mutants. And you enjoy it, if you're the right kind of person, which all of you should be by now. You enjoy seeing it out there. Of course, the real joy is being able to do it. But your joy is the same kind of joy. It's just a smaller reflection that I am hinting to you that life has in recognizing through you a delightful mutant, because it is an exception. It is not the rule. But also let me point out that this could be, what I'm saying is this delightful mutant, it could be a harbinger of the spring of change. Normally you're not going to live one lifetime long enough to find out. But you are still correct in experiencing a kind of joy to see that which is not the norm. That is in a profitable way. That here is somebody who by all acclaim, by an acclaim enough that it attracted me that I'm listening or I'm watching or I'm reading about this, that this person can excel at this. They are good at this, or they might just be beautiful, which people don't want to deal with. Well, they were just born that way. You got to believe that Raquel Welch had to work out and went through plastic surgery to look like that, or that Robert Redford did something to look like that. You know, they were born. You got to tell me. But there is a joy in seeing that which is unexpected, but is profitable. That here they are, all the way from apparently that they are great at some physical activity, which again, of course, proves there is an out there. Because the guy says, hey, I played basketball 5 hours a day from the time I was 12 to 17. Well, hey, that explains it. No wonder you're so good. Rather than the fact is, why did you do that and nobody else did it? Or rather than the fact, well, how about the other guys that played with you every day? Was there 4 or 5 guys around there that played 5 hours a day for 7 years? Yeah, where are they? Ain't none playing basketball. Well, never mind all that. I mean, there's certainly a difference between that and being beautiful or handsome. Right. Glad I finally saw that. There is a joy that you correctly, this person, expressed, a pleasant surprise in seeing that which is unexpected in a profitable way. That not only are you this that seems to be recognized, or that I recognize, boy, you're good at that. You're almost archetypical of being this kind of person, this kind of intellectual, this kind of artistic person, this kind of athlete. But then to find out that you also do so-and-so, I never heard of that. I'd never thought that somebody in your position would also be over here part-time. It's life being surprised that I can do this periodically. Although it may be a harbinger. Why is a mutually shared illusion of agreement so satisfying? The illusion of agreement. Why is it so satisfying? Well, let me say this. I never heard this term, I never used it, but I certainly know what it is. The illusion of agreement between two people, why is it so satisfying? Could I point out that it would be, that even this so-called illusion of agreement would be better than the big O, the big zero, the big no agreement, would it not? Or to take to a higher level, could we not suppose, after all that I have hinted to you, that life does strive to improve the relationship of its own parts, even if it has to start off with an illusion? Even if life, to go back to this crude, non-existent parallel verbally, if life realized it was having certain internal problems and decided, this is not very medically sound, but so what? That decided, look, I need better cooperation between my liver and my colon. And in some way, through magical abilities life has with studying with this guru and doing yoga, that life has got to the point that it can send down and get some of the cells in its liver to try and speak to some of the molecules over in the colon. Like, hey, all of us people, I grew up over here with these liver molecules, and I was led to believe, since the environment plays such a large part, that all you colon people were infidels, your feet stank, and you didn't believe in Jesus Christ, that you were terrible people. But I find you're not so bad. And I could say that ultimately liver cells have no business. There's no common denominator between liver cells and colon cells. That's not medically sound either, but I'll just say that. But if there were even the illusion of some kind of agreement, of some kind of understanding between the two, could not you conceive of the fact that life might ultimately find that to be a profitable way to expand itself, even down this illusionary route? Since there is no such thing as illusion anyway, but it starts out apparently illusionary. How about going around one of the tasks that I've given out? And you smile all day, from the time you get up to the time you go to bed. And damned, those of you who faithfully pursued it, if after 5, 10, 15 minutes, in spite of your best efforts, in spite of all the reasons you had to be pissed that day, ones that you knew about were coming up, those that happened during the day, and you continue to do this, damned if something didn't happen. Well, there was the illusion that I was smiling. And boy, I'm glad that's over so I can get back. I've got some things to be mad about that I've got to catch up. What responsibility does a parent or an adult have toward their genetic offspring as far as being an example of someone attempting some expansion or development of themselves, such as being involved with this? I'll be glad to respond again to this kind of question and point out that the basis for your offspring, which in truth can be lumped with everybody else, but it seems as though it's a specific area to ask, and your blood kin do feel different than everyone else. But your responsibility is not in front of them, to their knowledge, to be serving thee, and in no way to ever encourage or to lead them to do so. But if you were good enough, let us take it down to a good dirty point. It was your genetic offspring. And you did develop a kind of triaxial sight to realize, to see that this genetic offspring right here is truly wired up, bound in servitude to serve thee. Then you got to cut them loose. You got to be able to do, if somebody else can do it, if mechanical people can abandon their children, that's too dirty to put it that way. That's too harsh. To all you fine thinking people. If you could see that one of your own genetic offspring was a once and for all captive of thee, you would be able to cut them loose like a bad habit. There is a certain kind of blood tie that you'll always have, and you might go to their funeral when they die. You might cry when they die. But I assure you that you got to be able to cut off everybody. And that's a terribly inefficient way of expressing it verbally. But I'm not going to talk for 4 or 5 hours trying to cushion the blow for all of you decent men and women. If you were really good, if you want me to push it further, if you were really good, if you had expanded enough, you could look upon a genetic offspring 2 or 3 seconds, 2 or 3 minutes after it was born and cleaned up enough to where it didn't look like a boiled duck, that you could look upon it, and in some cases, quite easily, you can see that kid's future. You can see the beginning and the end of it. You still have the duty to raise them, feed them, feather the nest, keep the rats out of their hair. But even your own offspring, there's not that much difference between your own offspring and your own parents, which I've been through on many occasions, responding to questions and things I know about line level relationship between people and their parents. There's not that much difference between your relationship with your parents and those with any genetic offspring that you may have. It is not your job to enlighten your parents. It's almost impossible. You had unusual bloodlines, you had unusual genetic codes, or you would not be here. No matter how mundane and run-of-the-mill your parents may have seemed to you at the time, or even now in your own current recollection. But I assure you that genetically, there was a certain bizarre string of patterns to bring you here. You were not in the same genetic pattern and bloodlines as such illustrious people as, Hitler, Arthur Fiedler, John Kenneth Galbraith, William F. Buckley, all those kind of people. Florence Nightingale, Barbara Walters. And by that same token, if anyone's entertaining your own internal voices, to say, well, in that case, then my children have a certain out of the ordinary genetic pattern in them. You got to look at it this way. It's been watered down by half of whatever it was that you had. Plus, you should be able to stick this together, that this thing does not pop up on any kind of linearly predictable basis. If so, your parents would have been mystics. Your parents worked for the post office and kept a house. And here you are. You do have a particular duty to your children, though, as simply as you cannot serve thee in front of them. I mean, if you're going to ask me, that is your duty. And it gets down specifically, your duty would be, absolutely, if you consider that this has some importance, which it does eventually, but right now, most people, you got so many problems worrying about your children. It's similar to putting off the possible while pondering the impossible. But if you want to really ask, your duty would eventually be, is don't let your children ever hear you criticize somebody else. Don't let them ever see, hear, suspect, hear your internal voices talking about somebody else in a hostile manner. And you will not tolerate them doing it. You simply don't allow it. You cannot raise a child in some extraordinary way. The only way you could do that would be to establish a home-style monastery. You'd have to keep the kid in the house, just with you, no TV, no radio. Keep them there, raise them at least to the age of 12. That's safe enough. Keep them right there with you, no other influences, and you will have somebody that would make Adolf Hitler look like probably Immanuel Kant, or maybe even Barbara Walters. You would have one of the all-time, I mean, you would have a world-class nut. You would make the history books. I'm being serious. You would raise a mutant that I'm not even sure life would allow to live. You cannot do that, is the point. Well, people try it on a very isolated basis. But you cannot do that. You would be an absolute idiot. You would be a mutant yourself to try that. Life, genetically, the molecular structure of life is going to grow, it is going to move, it is going to expand, it is going to convert energy as it must. In other words, if there was an out there, if there was an environment, I'll use those terms, life's environment, by and large, is going to raise your offspring. That's the way it appears. It's not true, but that is the way it appears. About all you can do of any profitable nature until they reach the age that they could display, if they had it, some genetic interest in this. Up to that point, it is almost a negative approach. The very things that life does, the very jobs and tasks that ordinary people have of being hostile, being tense, converting energy, being critical, all those neat things. That's going to happen. It's going to happen with their peers. They see it on television. They get it everywhere because they're in last body. To answer the question the way it was asked, is directly, is almost a negative approach. Is there certain parts of that that you refuse to allow between you and the kid? And of course, to make it work, you cannot criticize. You cannot talk about other people in any manner. And the first time he or she does it, you say, don't ever do that again. And that's easy to enforce. If you don't do it, you tell them once, the next time you hit them with a brick. And they won't do it. And it produces a conducive background. Nothing wrong with it. You're fulfilling your duty as far as you can. But it is not that dissimilar, as I pointed out, to be able to cut out this genetic, this unprofitable genetic tie between you and your parents, is you cannot engage in that with them. You can't be around your parents and them start saying, let me tell you what your Aunt Edna did. Tell them no. You can do it non-verbally. If that don't work, you do it verbally. And if that doesn't work, you do it through behavior. You can stop it after 40 years. That you will not participate. I won't listen to it. I don't do it. I'm not going to hear you do it. That's it. You can do it in the same way with a child. But you're not going to in some way enlighten your parents. You're not going to turn them into suddenly astounded Buddhas of them realizing, well, you're an exceptional child and you have gone through some kind of spiritual awakening, and now by God you've done it to me. Hey. Do not hold your breath, but you produce a more conducive situation. You have given them an opportunity to breathe a kind of air that does not have the same kind of lethargic carbon dioxide waste products flowing between you and them and everybody else that is normally their background. It does not mean that's going to have a direct effect. But at least you're not participating in encouraging them to follow that course. And that'd be the same kind of thing that I'm referring to now with your kids. I could tell you worse. I could make it sound worse about kids. And I'm not trying to frighten anybody. I'm not trying to upset anybody. Because this is the same situation as life. It does feel different because it is a blood relationship, and there is a reality to that. You do feel different about your blood kin than you do other people. That is simply real. That doesn't mean that it's meaningful to you people, but it's there. But if you pursue this, you'll undergo your own kinds of internal shifts in your own system. It will come about that you do not have to ask, how should I treat my kids? How should I treat somebody else? How should I treat my parents? There is the world as it is. There is life as it is. And then there's the few of you, the damn few of you. And it's just few enough that you're not going to upset anything. You're mutants. We're all mutants. If you go by that which is mechanical, if you go by that which is molecularly, primarily accepted and expected in life's body, you won't stay in this. You'll never find what you're looking for. Most of you would not have lasted this long. That's the way it is. And it sounds harsh sometimes, but somebody asked me specifically again, it's not that you don't feel for your parents or your children, but only out in that great stage, only out the great many men and women playing the great man and woman of La Mancha, only they can profitably dream the impossible dream, fight the unbeatable foe. That's what life is about. That is a part of the healing process. That is a part of what humans are about, except for the few that realize, I cannot heal this person. I cannot heal my mother. She's a hypochondriac. I cannot heal my father. He is a raving, prejudiced bigot. He's an idiot from many viewpoints. I cannot heal him because he's not sick. I cannot heal my mother. I've got a kid that's a drunk. He goes to jail twice a year. And he calls me to come bail him out, or he used to. And I quit doing it, or I never did it. But you realize, wait a minute, I can't heal him for one simple reason. Not that he's too far gone. Not that alcohol has rotted his brain. I can't cure him because he ain't sick. That's him. That's it. Until I underwent some shift, he was just a version of me. Everybody was a version of me. I held everybody else responsible. What you should do is quit drinking and get a job, young man. I tried to raise you right. Did you try to raise you right? What kind of influences do the voices have on you within the partnership? And the answer is, of course, remember, only mutants ever suspect that. Everybody else says, no, no. I've changed some, and I'm going to change more. And even the ways that apparently I haven't changed, I suffer so much in my soul that at least I don't do these things with the same degree of passion that I used to. You do that which can be done. I want to give you a variation of one of my great cosmic laws. When all is said and done, there's nothing else to hear or do. Now that's just between us. That is not true for everybody else. Don't bother to tell them. Well, that's all the questions that I brought out here. So since that's the case, I'll point this out in the interim. That's all. The task for the week. For those of you who haven't done it, or those of you who want to repeat it. Starting the day after you see this tape, until next week, I want you to do this. I'll give you a choice. Do it either once an hour for the children and the babies, and those of you who may still be intellectuals. The rest of you, I want you to do it for the week. So I want you to repress, to ignore, to not heed your own internal voices when you're with other people, and give all of your attention to their external voice, them. Try and take all of your attention and listen to their external voice and give no heed. No heed to what your own voices are saying while you're with somebody else.